Vajradara Sumatimo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajra. Vajradara Sumatimo Nisha Sane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nisha Sane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke kudan dagi lu, pakyuke sundan dagi nga, pakyuke tukdan dagi yi, tön yerme çıktı çingi lo, makyuke kudan dagi lu, makyuke sundan dagi nga, makyuke tukdan dagi yi, tön yerme çıktı çingi lo. Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakya Muni Svoha. Sashipeki Choshiameto Tamare Ravalingashi Nidegempadi Sange Shinto Mikte Ulwarki Drokunam Dashinla Chopar Shoyidam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kam Niryatayami Sangye Chudan Tsogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chudan Tsogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chudan Tsogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho. Nel Buddha, nel Dharma.
In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge in enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge into enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Namo yal haye ke da luda ne chin ke drubundan da mi ke nam da drowa kuinge tranam chitsampa tamche ke to dagi cheten.
Good morning. Yesterday, we looked at the part that regards breathing and 5-cycle breathing to unblock all the blockages we have as part of the preliminary practices, also throughout the practice, but also in preliminary practices. We won't get into the details of the preliminary practices, but I advise you that those who have the chance to study, to inform yourself, look at the commentaries regarding the preliminary practices. The Dharma of preparation, for example, and the comment within Guru Pujas, and also that of self-healing. But today we're going to start from another part of explanations, which regards the state of generation. And I'm going to get straight to the point without too much introduction, because we have a lot to see. So, the generation stage, or rather the effective part of the practice, it is divided into 2 parts. Not self-healing, whatever tantric practice we consider in the Vajrayana tradition, whatever practice one does, usually they apply to the 4 different classes of tantra: action, yoga, anattara yoga, tantra, chagyo, and nyechugyo, in Tibetan. So the 4 classes of tantra. Most of them, most of the practices that we do are usually part of the Kriya Tantra or Anattara Yoga. The practices of the 2 middle classes, which are called Charya Tantra and Yoga Tantra, there are practice less. Most of the practices we do, which we do regularly, are part of the past tantra. For example, Tara Bianca, White Tara, or the last tantra, Anattara Yoga. Self-healing is part of Anattara Yoga. Having said that, I realize I'm saying a lot and nothing at the same time, but just to locate the practice without going into the differences between the different classes of Tantra, just to say all the practices with Anuttara Yoga, be it self-healing or Tarachita Mani Yamataka, Guya Samaja Vajrayogini, Heruka, Chakra Sambhara, Kala Chakra. There are various practices. One of the characteristics that these have in this class of Tantra, means, so all of them are divided into generation stage and completion stage. Dzog Rim. Rim means stages, steps. Dzog means completion, realize. They're called in some cases the stages of completion in various ways. One of the characteristics of Yana Ragatana, if there are two determining factors of this class of Tantra, is if they have these two characteristics, generation and completion. The generation stage is where you prepare yourself. Let's imagine that we want to embark on a journey. At a certain point, the journey, we encounter difficulties. We're not really ready for the journey. If we start off today, we're going to fall over. We'll encounter a lot of difficulties. For example, I don't know you, but for example, let's a journey to walking, a journey that requires climbing mountains, or to hang gliding, and then another. If I had to swim underwater, I'd say okay. You arrive quite quickly there, but it's not that easy. I have to prepare myself to do all of these things. Therefore, I have to prepare myself. In preparation, it's the training for the journey in itself. The preparation part, let's remember, a lot of things are happening. It's not like you're doing nothing, but the preparation for the journey, the effective journey, which is called the generation stage. The completion stage, when you actually jump, when you actually take off and embark on the journey. Before that, there's the preparation or training before one departs, which is called the state of generation, in which what we develop, apart from the basis of the motivation, and the basis of this, there's a development of love, compassion, correct vision of reality. All these things are part of that. In generation, one also develops, main thing, is a different higher level of concentration, which is called shamatha and vipassana. A single-pointed concentration, together with the capacity for analysis. At the same time, we develop a part of awareness and control of our own subtle energies. These are the two important characteristics, apart from which a very strong familiarization of the method itself that we use. Okay, I'm simplifying maybe even too much. So when we talk about the two stages, so we just have an idea. It's useful to have a rough idea of the two stages. In self-healing, this stage of generation is when we start with Ayam Ram Lambam, purification of the elements, lotus flowers, seed syllables, symbols, and generation of the Buddhi. Then we have the 4 initiations of the vase, the 5 Dhyana Buddhas, or Mani Padme Hum then, which is the secret initiation in the Mahasukha. Wisdom and Vishwashanti is the initiation of speech. And that's a part of realization. When we do the practice, okay, I can't talk for everybody, but those of us who haven't completed the whole training of the generation stage, then I have to imagine that I'm embarking on this journey until I actually do it really. But I imagine I'm doing it as a way of preparing myself for the real actual journey. But the stage of realization, when you're really doing it, not just imagining, okay. So this is the first aspect I wanted to look at. In the process of developing concentration, one of the important things of training is, in this generation stage, one needs a high level of concentration. Well, let's go back one step. Where do we want to get to? Where do you want to get to in this generation stage? What's the point of it all? At the basis, what is it that we want? We want to be well. We don't want to suffer. And then maybe we can expand that a little bit. Our own love towards ourselves. We also want the others to be well. We want the others not to suffer. And with regards to this, what this generates a huge desire to get out of this state of suffering, and also that others manage to get out of this state of suffering. What generates suffering in life? If you study this, the teachings, if you look at the Four Noble Truths, we can see that what causes suffering is mental defilements, anger, hatred, rancor, aggressivity, egoism, impatience, attachment, desire, unlimited desire, dissatisfaction, jealousy, envy, and then there's fear, then there's arrogance, and doubt, and then obviously there's egoism, selfishness, and the basis of this is ignorance. One of the difficulties is that we have in confronting these mental poisons, in generating the antidote for all these, wisdom, altruism, love, compassion, patience, gratitude, generosity, and so on, is that it's not enough to generate it on a gross level. Conceptually, it doesn't work, because our mind has a very important characteristic. It's one of the pillars for me, which sustains the whole of Buddhist practice, is that our mind doesn't have the capacity to have two opposing views, to hold two opposing views at the same time. Can we think, I like water, but I like the temperature, but I don't like the taste. Can we think this at the same time? If we hear somebody singing, well, I like the melody, but not the words. That works, right? Okay. But we can't think at the same time, I like water and I don't like water at the same time. You try it now. I like water and I don't like water. Try and think of the two things at the same time. I don't know if somebody's managed to do it. I don't think so. We aren't able to generate two directly opposing views at the same time. Therefore, what happens? If we want to eliminate certain thoughts, we need to generate the direct opposite. That's the only real way of doing that. And to make a very long story short, our suffering is generated not only by anger, attachment, jealousy, etc., but at the basis we have selfishness, obsession for gratification, and we have ignorance, which is grasping at reality as if it existed in an independent or autonomous, objective way. Let's not get down that road, because we'd have to spend 3 days just looking at that. But here we see again, we see how important it is to have a good understanding of sutra before we embark on tantric practices. Our suffering is caused by our selfishness, and the basis of that, there's ignorance. To stop selfishness, we must generate altruism, love, compassion, and altruism. But if I generate altruism on a very conceptual stage, I block it on that level. But if I generate it on a deeper level, I will, according to the level I reach, I will block my egoism, selfishness. What causes our selfishness? Everybody, not. There are three levels: gross level, cultural level, conceptual. The gross manifest level, there's a deeper level, and then there's a very subtle level where we have the imprints of selfishness. There are 2 possible approaches, therefore. And that's the same with our ignorance, i.e. grabbing what appears to be objective reality. We have a gross, subtle, and very subtle level of this. And here there are 2 approaches. We can imagine this. Let's imagine the Earth, a terrain with very different levels. I have to water the Earth right until it gets to the bottom, to all the levels. So we go on the top level, we water it, then slowly, the water goes down until it reaches the lowest level. But if I don't water the ground enough, the water evaporates without reaching the lower levels. So therefore, we need to water the ground again and again, because there'll be various reasons for which it doesn't go down. Maybe current takes it away, or it evaporates. But if we keep watering, it'll reach the lower levels. This is when, at a gross level, the most superficial level regards our physical actions, our speech, and our gross thoughts. Everything we do on a gross level, and slowly, the water permeates the ground until it gets to the subtle and very subtle level, until we have transformation at a very subtle level of our mind and body. But obviously we need a lot of time for this. It's a process of lifetimes. What we do on a gross level, it's impossible to get to a very deep level immediately. One of our problems is that I'm going to make an incredible effort and generate a feeling of altruism on a gross level, which is already something, and I get this, and so I manage to water the ground a bit. It starts penetrating, and do I manage do I manage to maintain that level of altruism, or does selfishness come back? Egoism, selfishness comes back. And then instead of watering the ground, I put sun on to make it evaporate. I put an opposite, I exerted the opposite effort. Therefore, then in Tantra, one of the special characteristics is that there's a technique which is not easy, but it's very powerful. Let's imagine that we can dig a hole, drill a hole let's imagine we could drill a hole right from the surface right to the very subtle level, and then we can pour water in. What would happen? The water would immediately go down to the very subtle level. These are what these practices such as self-healing, this is what they have as an objective. The completion stage is when we manage to drill right to the deepest level, at the very subtle level of our mind, and at the very subtle level, we generate the antidote on a very subtle level to our ignorance and selfishness. So we need to take this state of love and compassion to a very subtle level, to immediately affect change at a very subtle level. Is that clear? Therefore, this is the objective. This is what we want to do. But to do this, we need to train ourselves in 2 things. One is to generate love and compassion, and wisdom, and the other one is to learn how to drill the hole to get to the deepest level. Beyond this, and the other thing is, if one shouldn't manage to do this, there's still one chance left. There's a moment in which the superficial levels of the earth, they go away, and underneath is so everything disappears. So everything we put in it goes to the deepest level, and this process is called death. At the moment of death, the last thought, on the gross level, directs the mind, and on a subtle level, and that on a subtle level affects the very subtle level. So it's as if on a very superficial level, when the superficial level falls away, and what's left is whatever we put in goes to the deeper levels. Can we see that analogy? So in the state of generation, one of the things in which we train ourselves, 1, generate love, compassion, and wisdom, which is obviously fundamental. And the second thing, and the other is to prepare ourselves to the 2 moments. One is to how to drill right to the deepest level, and prepare ourselves for the moment in which the upper levels of the earth is not there, and we get straight to the very subtle levels once we've made the drill. And we take advantage of the moment of death. So a good practitioner who doesn't manage to realize the state of completion in life at death has a very good opportunity. So therefore, there's a part of the practice which prepares us for death. In this, there are many things which happened that we do which have a whole load of positive side effects. So on the way, we from other very numerous positive side effects, but I'm getting straight to the point of the main objectives. So for self-healing, as all practices in that class of yoga, they have immediate benefits, but are an instrument that one can depend on until enlightenment. But I wanted to just to give a general and deeper understanding what the two stages of completion generation mean. Is that clear? Yes, no? Therefore, in Tantra, there's another fundamental aspect which you may have heard of and which is repeated everywhere. That of generating bliss and emptiness. And that's repeated everywhere. Bliss and emptiness. And then you might think, well, what is this all this? What are we talking about? First of all, it's important to say the path of Tantra, it can only be embarked on seriously. Well, I should just say embarked on, because you either do it or you don't do it. You can only embark on it when at the base there's a sentiment, a deep state, real love towards oneself and love towards others. So it's based on a sentiment of outer self-responsibility to abandon that which harms us and to adopt that which is good for us, and to take this responsibility on ourselves. And the next step is to expand this sentiment towards others and generate a feeling, a sincere feeling of love and compassion. This is the basis. Without Tantra, without this, Tantra just doesn't work. Which is called bodhicitta, this sentiment. Let's remind ourselves at the basis of this, let's remind ourselves there's always love and compassion, which is why we're repeating it the whole time. Can all beings have happiness in its causes? Can they be free of suffering in its causes? And during the process, the visualizations during mantra recitations, they're principally intended to create equanimity, to rejoice, to love others, and be compassionate. So those are the four main purposes of mantra recitation, which is why we repeat it and regenerate this sentiment of altruism, which is the most important aspect of the basis of the base. Having said that, when we talk about bliss and emptiness, using the analogy that we used before, bliss, it's the well that we're going to drill. Emptiness, which is, let's say, absolute bodhicitta's wisdom and love and compassion, is what we're going to put into our well. Because if we just make a well without having anything to put in it, there's not much point. And having something to put in it, so it's worthwhile waiting to the end when I am able to pour something into it. But bliss, it's an internal state of pleasure, which naturally brings the mind to a non-conceptual state. Try and think of Think of a time when you felt pleasure last time. Be it food, sexual, whatever thing. Extreme pleasure. If you think, where is the mind in that moment? Past, present, or future? It's the present. In the moment of pleasure, do we create mental problems for ourselves? May even just last a few seconds, but when we have a distillation of pleasure, and the stronger the pleasure, the more we manage to disconnect ourselves from concepts and elaborating thoughts about the present, the past, and the future. The state of pleasure, of enjoyment, has the natural capacity to bring us to a deeper level, non-conceptual level. And that's the well that we're drilling. With pleasure, I automatically create a deeper state of consciousness, which is less superficial. What happens if I enter into the state of pleasure with a sense of anger? What happens? I bring the anger to a very deep state. Because when you generate the state of pleasure, the impulse, the object, the mental object, it could be sadness, attachment, anger, desire, whatever it is, what is generated in that moment? It's as if we're drilling a well and we're putting whatever that is. It nourishes all the levels below. So if you generate a state of pleasure with a lot of attachment, a state of pleasure with a deep state of attachment, you're just generating attachment. But if I do reach that state of pleasure with altruism, what I'm doing is taking my altruism from a superficial to a deep level, same with wisdom. Whatever mental state we're talking about. Therefore, when we talk about bliss and emptiness, bliss is the state of pleasure, and wisdom is the object of perception. Let me explain better. If we hear this sound, the object of perception is the sound of the bell. We can hear it in a joyful state, or sadness, or neutral state. It's possible, no? I can be joyful, sad, or indifferent when I listen to it. That makes sense, no? Let's imagine if we felt bliss. Let's imagine we hear the sound. So bliss is the observer, and wisdom is the sound, is the object of perception. Therefore, the state of the observer is in a state of bliss. What goes together with that? The correct vision of reality, the lack of inherent existence of an autonomous reality, together with a state of love and compassion. This is called absolute bodhicitta. When we talk about bliss and emptiness, the bliss is an instrument, a means to take us from a conceptual level to a non-conceptual state, which unites with the perception, the realization of interdependence, lack of inherent existence, with a basis of love and compassion. And that is the union of bliss and emptiness, because if you generate bliss without having love and compassion and correct vision of reality, but if you, on the other hand, if you realize the lack of inherent existence, correct vision of reality without bliss, you have to go back and add a bit more bliss. I don't know if that's clear. I ask every now and again, because for me it's clear, but who knows, maybe for you not. And then when I ask myself, when I ask you, do you understand? I wonder what you have understood, but the alternative would be to ask everybody individually. Once, one of my masters, I got teachings with him twice that were really given to another disciple of his. I just went together with this other guy. And the other guy had to really understand, the other Lama, because he was going to teach it. He was a fantastic person, but didn't concentrate too well, my master. And the master could see when his mind was wandering. Okay, he'd say, come on, bring the airplane down, land the airplane. And the master would repeat it, and the other Lama who was taking the teaching would have to repeat it. So it took much longer, but at the end it was more effective. So the union of bliss and emptiness is one of the most important things. So in Tantra, we look for three factors. Tantra which are present in Tantra generally, and are represented in different ways, and are repeated everywhere. And because we need to train ourselves in this, love and compassion, so-called bodhicitta, altruism, correct vision of reality, the so-called bliss, and so-called emptiness and bliss. When we take the most important commentaries in the Tantric tradition, the king of Tantric in Guhya Samaja, the practice of Guhya Samaja, so the root Tantra, the king of all Tantras, Nagarjuna did one of them, and Lama Tsongkhapa elaborated on this. And I had the opportunity to study this, to receive the initiation. All the part of the state of realization is based on how to generate bliss, how to realize emptiness, and how to unite bliss and emptiness. That's the essence. That is the essence. Therefore, let's imagine you've seen, if you look at the representations, or offers, moments in which we're represented it as pleasure. It's not as if pleasure is to be, we need to take a distance. It's a good thing. So when we do the practice in self-healing, it's not done explicit, but in other words, when we give the various offerings, aqua to clean, to wash the feet, incense, what is all that? Objects to generate pleasure, and that's it. I was joking once with a friend of mine. For me, it would work better if we had So for me, maybe pizza and mozzarella would have more sense. It depends on your objects of desire. On one side, on one hand, I'm joking, but we need to remember that these things are not, they're not just ceremonial, these things. It's not just because it's a manual to follow. That's not it. They're means to generate something within ourselves. And one of the things, the most important things, is to generate bliss. That's why we see in so many, everywhere in Tantra we see talk about sexual aspect of pleasure. There are also images which represent seduction, because one of the various mundane pleasures that we have, one of the instruments, most powerful instruments that we have at our disposition as human beings is that which we enjoy in sexual union. The point is, it's not sex or eating or music. We're talking about the importance of being able to connect ourselves with a state of joy and pleasure. So part of Tantra is to generate, to connect ourselves a state of pleasure. One of the instruments that we train ourselves in the generation stage is explained as, let's take when we talk about purification of the elements, we're looking at this, it's possible to generate a state of pleasure internally without having to depend on external objects. And when you manage to do this, the nearest way to putting it into words, the easiest way to put it into words, it's like, we'd have to say it's like an orgasm that never stops. I remember once, I'm not talking about somebody who meditated in the caves, who was doing a retreat. And at a certain point, he finished a session. Look, Lama, he came to me and said, I have to tell you something, but I'm a bit ashamed. I don't know how to tell you, but it was so strong. I said, that's what happened. While he was doing the mantra, at a certain point, he felt this heat rising in his body. And I felt, he said, like an orgasm. It was like an orgasm that never finished. It just filled my whole body. This is a description of generating pleasure, bliss, which doesn't depend on external objects, an external stimulus, but an internal process. This is one of the things which also is part of Tantra, the fact that we have the capacity to self-generate bliss without having to depend on external stimuli. Therefore, question? First of all, if somebody experiences that pleasure, it means the capacity, that they have the capacity. The thing is, if one makes progress, if there are blessings, if there's the motivation, you have the method and use it correctly, there's no reason why you shouldn't have that experience. We're not talking about and there's so many ways of generating a state of bliss without being part of a specific practice, but generally what happens is that I'll just get into this very quickly. One of the most important things in the process, and Lama Tsongkhapa wrote about this very well, the first condition, first necessary condition in order to be able to create bliss and to use bliss on the path is the non-attachment to bliss itself. Because if you're attached to it, if you see it as an end in itself, that's a complete con. You're conning yourself. Therefore, the point is not to create pleasure just because it's pleasurable. Because there is sometimes the danger. Yeah, once I made an analogy of Tantra like an extreme sport because it's difficult, but one can think, because I want to generate this bliss and emptiness for the benefit of others, but really what you're doing is you're just generating pleasure for yourself. I mean, that can happen. Therefore, there's a process which has to be done very, very well at the beginning, and to understand, to generate the right motivation. One understands that pleasure in itself is not worth anything, but as a means to, it's very, very powerful. I'm trying to give you an overview, also to understand better how the aspects of Tantra. So we've seen there's the basis, bodhicitta, love and compassion, correct vision of reality. These two unite and become one, altruism and wisdom, and become, which is called absolute bodhicitta, and then we have on the other side to general bliss. But I wanted to give you this input just to understand why in Tantra we have so many moments in which we talk about bliss, in which we use symbology of bliss and pleasure. Why? Why? Not because pleasure is an end in itself, but because when it's used, as an instrument, it's very powerful. Is that clear? Therefore, at the beginning of the generation stage, so the generation stage is made up principally of 3 stages, 3 transformations. In self-healing, there's an extra one, which, like Haruka and other practices, Vajrayogini, they also have, which is called the generation of the body mandala. Therefore, in self-healing, we can divide the state of generation in 2 parts. 1, 3 transformations, and then generation of the body mandala. Let's look at the 3 transformations, and then we'll see if we have time in the next few days to look at the body mandala. The 3. First, to transform the clear light of death into Dharmakaya, which is the body, speech and mind at a very subtle level, which in a very pure form, to transform Bardo, which is the intermediate stage after death, into Sambhogakaya, so-called the body of enjoyment, to bring that into a subtle stage in a very pure form, and then rebirth into Nirmanakaya, the process of rebirth, taking a growth level which is the gross body in a pure state, nirmanakaya. Body and mind in a very subtle form is dharmakaya. Sambhogakaya on a subtle level, and body and mind in gross level. Gross level is nirmanakaya. So gross enjoyment and very subtle level. Therefore, the first thing, before we get into the first transformation we simulate the process of death, and that what we said before, there are different levels, as we said before. So when we arrive at death, we have the essence, all the superficial levels have been swept aside. Before we do this, we need to generate on the superficial what we want to permeate to the very subtle level. So at the beginning of the generation stage, the first thing that we must generate before we enter into the transformation stage of death, etc., the first thing is to generate bliss and emptiness and the correct view of reality. The correct internal attitude. And if I had to describe it very precisely, once we've generated this state, it needs to be maintained all through the practice. But at the beginning, that's what we generate. And that's done when we've purified the elements in self-healing, which is to get bliss, Om Sabhava Shuddha Sabha Ham, which is the moment in which we generate a correct view of reality and wisdom. With this, we embark on the other part, simulating the process of death, and to bring this state of wisdom with love together with bliss from a gross level, slowly, to a very subtle level, simulating the death process. This is what we do. Then tomorrow, I'll explain this meditation much better. It's for me, it's one of the best parts. Let's have a look at the first part, first of all, how to create bliss and then emptiness, which is already a hell of a lot. So when you create bliss in other practices, it's described as, in a symbolic way, what's done, what's created internally is done through symbols. It's expressed through symbols. I was once asked to explain the practice of Yamantaka, and that day I described the internal offerings. I went to lunch with Lama Gangchen, Geshe-lo Sampende, who's the abbot of Tashilumpa, who's no longer with us. So anyway, Rinpoche asked me, what did he do? And I explained what I'd explained. And Rinpoche said, okay. And the abbot, wow, how lucky you are. I said, why? Because usually we only explain the symbology and not the meaning. What's the corresponding part internally? But here, you have the opportunity to come into contact not only with the symbology, also the internal part. This is not thanks to me, it's thanks to Lama Gangchen. It's Rinpoche, Lama Gangchen's way of teaching, very deeply but very simply. When we when we do Yamantaka or Guya Samaja or Vajragini, we often use this, which is called the inner offering. And certain times we get into a dynamic, we kind of use it only as a ceremony. You have to buy this object and do this in that way. It's all about ritual. Oh, but when you have to open it like this, and you have to do this, touch in this way, which is okay. It's not a criticism. But what happens is that we miss the deeper meaning. We get stuck in the ceremony, and we don't even ask ourselves, what do I have to generate? So what is the symbology? At the basis, we have Yam, the wind mandala arises, which is represented by a semicircle. I don't know if you can see it. And above that, okay, let's teach it properly. So you have the wind. Now you can see it's a semicircle, which represents, this is what you should be visualizing, which represents the wind element. And above that, there's a triangle, you can see, of fire. If you look well, now you can see it's all little depictions of fire all around it. But there are 3 skulls, human skulls. One white, which is dried up, not cut from the body. Do you just see and then another one is red, a penna decapitated. And then the other one, which is green, which is beginning to rot. So this is a bit macabre, the whole thing. Above this, there's a skull, in which the top part, is that how you say it? The top part of the skull. There's the kapala, so-called kapala. We have the 5 meats and the 5 nectars. The 5 meats are cow, elephant, horse. These are urine, shit, blood, bone marrow, and sperm, feces. So the little flags start waving around, which makes the wind increases, which fans the fire, and it heats up and becomes a kind of soup, and the hum enters and eliminates all impurities, and the air transforms it into nectar, and the om expands, increases the nectar. So in our body, where do we find wind? Where is the wind in our body? So when we sit cross-legged, we have a semicircle. That's wind. When we purify the elements, which is air, which is space, and then we have yam. And when do we put yam? In the secret chakra, the wind. So the wind goes into the secret chakra, and it rises from the secret chakra, and it rises into the navel chakra, where then we have the fire, and the fire and heats the earth at our heart chakra, and the water at our throat evaporates, and it evaporates and we say the bodhicitta melts and it descends and generates a state of bliss throughout the body. It's described as the part of bliss. It's called white bodhicitta. It's found principally in the crown chakra. So that's why we have the kapala, the semi-skull, because that's where the white bodhicitta is located. And the process that's represented in this object, so the three, for example, decapitated heads represent 3 levels of ignorance. So it's the internal process, the pranas which enter our secret chakra, and the tuma fire is activated, which sometimes is called kundalini. This internal fire rises this fire until the white bodhicitta, white, is melted at our crown chakra and comes down like a rain of bliss, which creates this wonderful feeling of bliss. When we look at this, I think we can see the symbology better. We have wind, fire. We have the wind, fire, and the head. The 5 meats and nectars. This fire, which arrives at the head, which boils, purifying these 5 meats and nectars. The 5 meats are nothing other than that's our metaphor, which represents our 5 aggregates: body and mind, that means, form, sensation, discernment, compositional factors, and consciousness. And the 5 nectars are a symbology which represent the 5 elements: earth, fire, earth, wind, and fire, and space. They become nectar, they're transformed. The body and mind, the 5 elements which are purified, create the possibility of experiencing and generating this great state of bliss. In various moments, when we use this object throughout the practice, it reminds us of this bliss. Lama Gangchen Rinpoche, in his wisdom, and used this symbol which, and his wonderful caring of us, he used so many times. Actually, it wasn't actually explained, which is part of the Eastern way of teaching. In the Western way, we have to understand step by step, but in the East, the Far East, it's different. I'm not going to explain anything to you. You do it, and then slowly, slowly you understand. And when you understand, you really understand. Every night in bed, people may complain, we're not explained, nothing's explained. It's a different way. Here we're kind of a halfway house. We explain. We don't do level 1, level 2, etc., because it's not just a conceptual process. If you do this visualization every day, at a certain point, slowly you understand. It has a different power. But rather than just understanding it at the beginning conceptually, in the practice of self-healing, what we're doing is the process of purification. The five aggregates, body and mind, and the 5 elements. This is what we do with Yam Lambam. Space, Yam, wind, Ram, fire, Lam, earth, Bam, water. Shuddha soha. Where yam ram lam. Soha, on the other hand, goes from the crown right down to the secret chakra. Why? Because shuddha means clean. Shuddha, clean. Also in the sense of clear, transparent. We can also translate it as clean. Clean, soha, and so be it. So when the nectar descends, air, so the base, space, wind, fire, earth, and the heat rises and evaporates water and purifies the 5 elements and the factors, compositional factors are pured, and then the bodhicitta at each chakra permeates every channel from each chakra, and then we do shuddha soha. This represents why this nectar descends, creates a sense of bliss and pures negativities and energetic blockages that we have. That's why shuddha soha goes from the head right down to the crown, right down to the secret chakra. We also do eho shuddha soha, yamo shuddha soha in Tantric practices, where we put emphasis on each element to purify each one. So to make it really happen, and here within the state of generation, there is a training, the effective practice. We have visualization, recitation, and realization. When we have purified the elements, one can really make the wind arise and generate more heat, and can actually make it happen. That's within the generation stage. This part of the practice, there's the training, and the effective part, when we actually manage to realize what we're reciting. We can have many different levels. We can have a sensation of pleasure on very different levels. We don't have to go straight to the extreme level, the deepest level. We start the practice with a process of imagination. So one of the important things in the generation states, normally we're used to having attention, not 99% of the time, towards the outside. Even when we listen to our thoughts, most of our thoughts are directed to external objects. What we're doing in the state of generation, amongst other things, is to generate the habit to turn our attention towards the inside. All the practice happens within us, inside of us. When we do the purification of elements with Om Guru Buddha Siddhi Hum, even, we're bringing the attention towards ourselves. And this is to change our habits, because we're so used to projecting our attention to the outside. So the purification of the elements, every element has a sound which represents the essence, and there's a color, and there's a form. Therefore we have space and the crown chakra, which is blue, which is a sphere, and the sound is air. Wind have a semicircle, green, the sound of yam. Fire, triangle, red, sound of ram. Earth, square or cube, yellow, with a sound of lamb. And the white sphere of water at the throat with the sound of bam. Some people think when they do the visualization, it's like the little book. It's like making a kind of collage. And some people haven't even put the shapes at each chakra. We don't need to visualize the precise form of the symbol. It's to remind us of the fire. When, for example, when it's not purified, the fire's a little bit unstable, it flickers. But when the wind blows the semicircle, it's not a little design, it's the wind in itself which forms that shape, because it descends and then goes up through the secret channel. That is why it's a semicircle. So it's the wind that moves, which moves and enters the secret channel, which then feeds the fire. So in any fireplace, if you want to stop the fire, you take away the oxygen. Similarly, so it's not as if like when we're at Lam, we forget the wind. No, the wind continues to blow and goes through the secret channel. So we put our attention there. We imagine everything within the secret channel, the main channel. So it gets stronger and stronger. And in our navel chakra, we have the fire. And then the part of the chest represents the earth, and the fire, the heat, heats up the earth, our chest and our heart. And then we get water in our throat, which starts to boil, and the vapor goes up. And the vapor condenses, which dissolves the body, chitta, and then there's So everything is within our central channel. When we do this in the practice, we can do it with recitation, with mudras, or once you've done the mudras, you just sit there and you concentrate on the wind. 5 minutes you can take or more. Yam, 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 shuddha, shuddha, soha. You can recite this, or even in silence, to imagine the wind. And then you go on to the fire. So you stay there, calmly visualizing the fire, imagining it increasing in strength. What happens is that when we do this, it's that the body goes where the mind directs it. So in Tantra, it's described as the body is like a blind horseman. So the mind is like it's a blind horse, and the mind is like we can only go where the body can only go where the mind directs it. So we're automatically directing our body. A friend of mine who had a stroke, and she was paralyzed on one side. She imagined, one of the exercises was to imagine, when we manage to imagine the movements, and then the mind directs the impulses. So one of the examples in the texts, when you think of raising your arm, you imagine it, you're directing the mind, and then there are signals, that la prana, subtle wind, which goes towards the mind, which the mind directs this wind to raise the arm. There's a very strong link between nervous system and prana, subtle winds. When we focus our attention to a certain part of our body, we naturally direct our energy also on a physical level. That's why we when we generate fire, and to actually be able to do it if you just manage to breathe correctly, concentrating on the navel chakra and focalizing on the fire there, you generate heat. It's not that impossible. But if I go, oh, yeah, ram, bam, superficially, and so it didn't work. Well, I'm thinking about lunch, let's say. The power is in our mind, our capacity to remain there. You just need to do it properly, do it well, for long enough, and it'll happen. Apart from the fact that direct way, also indirect way, is to remind ourselves. It's also a way of reminding ourselves that we're made of 5 elements. They're not just features that we can use when we understand that we're made of these 5 elements. The way we interact with the elements changes. But at the moment, it's important to concentrate well, to spend time purifying the elements in a very conscious way when the fire increases and the heat rises and it arrives at the head and the vapor condenses, and the bodhicitta at each, the bodhicitta at each chakra. So the intersection of all the channels in our body, actually chakra means wheel, at each part of our body, they're made up of an intersection of a certain number of channels. So crown, throat, heart, navel, and secret chakra. There are some practices with 7 chakras. So who's right, Hindus or Buddhists? It's the wrong question, I say. Because in Buddhism, in some practices, there are 7 chakras. It's the emphasis, the question of the emphasis that is given at that time. We have 70,000 channels. We can actually learn to count them. It's a bit late, but there's a little bit of basic maths. So there's the crown chakra, 4 chakras, and to the other chakras as well. In self-healing, emphasis is given in self-healing to the 5 chakras. So it doesn't mean that the more chakras you use, the better it is. No, it's nothing to do with that. It's not better or worse. Every method gives a different emphasis. So there's not that kind of comparison. When the white bodhicitta descends at each chakra, as it passes, it enters from the central chakra and it permeates through all the radiating channels in each chakra, and it goes down in the same way through each chakra. And from this we can say we have generated, so we've created the mandala of the body and mind through the purification of the elements. In these days, I'd like to take advantage, use the opportunity to explain what is normally not written. Because what's written, you can read it yourselves. And traditionally, there are various things. Traditionally, there are things that are only transmitted verbally. The important thing is, if you can, the more correct way of explaining methods of meditation, when it's explained, so once something is explained, you should really try and do it in the correct way. Do it once or really 3 times before you go on to the next explanation. So I invite you to do this today before we go on to the next meditations, to get into the visualizations, to allow yourself to experiment and to feel it and to feel. Let's do the dedication. Tomorrow I'm going to look at the I'll be looking at emptiness and going through the death process. We actually have a little booklet in the shop, which is the death process. It's 4 pages, so it's available in the shop. Anyway, it's very useful. Sorry, just to add as translator, I forgot to say that the mind is the horseman who can see but is crippled, and the horse can't see but carries the horseman.
Drove Michel takto ne gyurchi kyawakunto yanda lama dang drame cheke pela longchechi sada lamge yente rabzone dorje change kopa nyurtobo sho nimo dele tsindele nime kuyan delekshi ninsen takto delekpe kuncho sumke chingelob kuncho sumke ngodrubtsol, kuncho sumke trashisho. All'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i 3 gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni, possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Una sola cosa che non ho detto, importante.
One thing I didn't say, when we purify the elements, there's the moment of visualization with recitation. When we go to meditate on the purification of the elements in silence, it's important to unite with breathing correctly. In very few words, as I explained yesterday, we breathe in deeply. I take the air underneath my navel, and the wind which is purified, and I maintain the air there underneath my navel, which helps the fire to increase. And then I exhale. The heat continues to rise. When I breathe in again, the wind enters. I hold it there, which helps the fire to grow. So you need to combine that with breathing. At dawn, at dusk, on night and midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Have a nice lunch, everybody.